put you first, that's all I need. I humbled all I am, all to you. There we go, one way. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. Till forever meets no end. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. The way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight for you. Living all for you. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight for you. Living all for you. Sing it out. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight for you. And living all for you. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight for you. Living all for you. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. Good morning, First Baptist Church of Pearl City. How are we doing today? It's a great day to worship the Lord, isn't it? We are in His house, and we just want to sing songs of praises to Him. But first, let's all stand and just greet one another with a warm welcome. High five, air shaka. lets his coat and quietly sinks into the back row. The weight of their judgmental glances tells him that his chances are better off on the road. If we are the body, why aren't his arms reaching? Why aren't his hands healing? Why aren't his words teaching? If we are the body, why aren't his feet going? Why is his love not showing them there is a way? Jesus paid much too high a price for us to pick and choose who should come. We are the body of Christ. And if we are the body, why aren't his feet arms reaching? Why aren't his hands healing? Why aren't his words teaching? We are the body. Why aren't his feet going? Why is his love not showing them there is a way? There is a way.
Oh, I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, when I see many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, it's love so undeniable. I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable. I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love.
You may be seated. Children's 4 through 7 is now excused for Children's Church.
Morning. How are you guys doing this week? As we kind of prepared for the message and our worship time this week, I began thinking about all the people that I had the opportunity to live around growing up, as well as to this very day. And when I thought about it, there was the good, the bad, the noisy, the irritating, as well as those who became somewhat like extended family. And I know it's a rather weird thought, but it's in line where we're going this morning. But as quickly then, as I began thinking about those things, my thoughts began to wander, and I wondered at that point, because it was kind of more of an ADHD moment where I kind of thought of those things, and as quickly as that happened, I switched gears, and I was like, wow, I wonder if they have a list of, the most interesting or the best TV neighbors, because they're out there, I've watched them over the years, and so I began this search online, and as it turns out, there were many rankings over the years, and they are somewhat consistent. Some of them will have different ones here and there. And so I landed on this one website called Culture Brats, and so let me share with you what their top 5 was. So at number 5, there's Lenny and Squiggy. I don't know if you grew up during the 70s and the 80s, but Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley were kind of like kind of these big sitcoms on TV, and Lenny and Squiggy were this odd, couple of guys that were neighbors to Laverne and Shirley, and it was, I would say, be categorized more on the interesting side of neighbors. But, then there's Bart Simpson's neighbor that comes in at number 4, Ned Flanders, and if you have watch any of these programs. In fact, this is the longest running TV show at this point, The Simpsons. And so Ned Flanders comes in at number 4. At number 3, there's Penny from, The Big Bang Theory. And so that was kind of at one point the top comedy on TV. Then there's at number 2, Chandler and Joey from Friends. And at the top of the list is Kramer from Seinfeld. Now, I don't know if any of you guys can relate to any of these neighbors. For me, when I started looking at this list, I kind of thought there were people missing, and maybe it's just kind of when I grew up, when I was a young kid, I remember watching all these TV shows, and for some reason, I had thought that at least they would break the top 10 would be Mrs. Kravitz from Bewitched, because she was always peering out the window, all up in everybody's business, or Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver, who was always there at the right time to receive whatever, treats or any good thing that was coming, and so, when I looked at this, I thought, wow, this was kind of somewhat of a neat list. My kids kind of told me that it's outdated because there aren't really good neighbors now on TV because they don't know much of them. But if you haven't figured it out yet, this morning we're exploring the subject of neighbors. In fact, we're gonna camp out in this area of what it looks like to be a good neighbor for the next few weeks. And this morning I want us to take a look at the people in our neighborhoods. I shared last week that I don't think it's enough to just be a church
that has a building in the community, but we need to be a church that is intentional about serving its community. And to do that, to serve, to be the eyes and ears and the hands and feet of Jesus, we need to know the people in our neighborhoods. Robert Emmett McGrath, who played the role of Bob Johnson, a music teacher who lived on Sesame Street, shared these famous words that I believe most of us have heard, and so let's listen to a clip of that song. I think we have that.
Oh, oh, who are the people in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood, in your neighborhood. Say, who are the people in your neighborhood? The people that you meet each day.
Again, those words, he says, say, who are the people in your neighborhood? The people that you meet each day. This song asks the same question that an expert of the law asked Jesus some 2,000 plus years ago. And it's the very same question that we should be asking ourselves today, which is, who's my neighbor? And this morning, I want us to take a look at one of the most read parables of Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I want to read that for us, and then we'll kind of just go through it, and then we'll kind of jump into the sermon this morning. And so the parable of the Good Samaritan is found in the Gospel of Luke, the 10th chapter, starting with verse 25. I'll read that for us. It starts out with, on one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed him on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to a place and saw him, passed him by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. This parable, it's really, this provides this insight into what a neighbor ought to look like. If we've ever moved into a new neighborhood, some of these things, it may resonate with us, right? Check this out. If we moved in, we may have been greeted, and I don't know when was the last time you moved houses, you moved into a new neighborhood, but when you do, you may be been greeted with friendly waves or a helping hand. Hey, can we help you guys, bring some of those boxes in? Or, sometimes people may come over and, even bring some baked goods over to be neighborly. Here in Hawaii, from condos to apartments, from family dwellings to multi-family dwellings, neighbors of all kinds exist. And like our families, we really can't pick them. I mean, I guess we could, technically, right? We could sacrifice all the things we want just based on who's living there. But they could move and we wouldn't be able to pick the new neighbors. So we really can't pick them. And so neighbors, they're right there. They're right beside us for better or for worse. And whether we like it or not, the people we call our neighbors, they contribute to our day-to-day lives and communities, sometimes in good ways, and sometimes in more interesting ways. Again, for better or for worse, these are the people we find in our neighborhoods. The individuals we call our neighbors. Now, just as a question that the expert of the law asked Jesus, which was, and who is my neighbor? I believe we also need to entertain the question or a similar one. Perhaps the question to ask is not so much who are the people in my neighborhood, but rather who are the people that I am a neighbor to. And they sound somewhat familiar, but the latter, puts the burden of responsibility on us. We can say who are the people and kind of identify and know the people in our neighborhood. But I think the question here is more, who am I a neighbor to? And I say this because I want us to be intentional. Intentional not only to know who's in our neighborhood, but who we are neighbors to. Who has God called us to be neighbors to, or be neighborly to, And I really want us to chew on this question for a bit, and perhaps through this parable we'll get a better understanding of who we're called to be neighborly to. As we approach our teaching points this morning, I'll be phrasing each teaching point in the form of a question. A question to be answered by us individually. And so the first question is this: are we a neighbor to the undeserving? Let's take another look at verse 30. It says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. Then they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched a movie where a character appears to deserve everything he or she is getting. They're the character there, and the warning signs are up. People are saying, don't do this, and then they go out and actually do this, or they do the opposite of it, right? We as parents, when your kids are young, or I remember when I was young, one of the things would be, the stove is hot. Don't touch the stove, right? And I was the kind of kid where I don't know why I'm wired this way, but if you say don't do something, then I kind of feel like don't is the equivalent of do, and so I just go and do it, right? Don't touch the stove, it's hot. The next thing, my parents would hear some kind of, and did I deserve everything I got? Yeah, I guarantee, most definitely, and my mom would be more nurturing. My dad would be like, well, now you know what hot feels like, right? And we get that mindset where, that I deserved everything that I got, second degree burns, whatever, now the fact that I have no fingerprints, but it's like that, right? Where we see those people, right? And if we're familiar with this, scenario, the results on TV when people, ignore the warning signs are often tragic. I mean, that's like straight up right in the scary movies where, they're like, okay, they know that there's a serial killer out there. I hear a noise. Should I check it out? No. Right? And so we ignore the warning signs, and the results are for tragic. So that's the movies. But here we find a man in this parable who has taken a route that is highly discouraged by most people. This road from Jerusalem to Jericho, it was known for its danger, and also it wasn't an easy path. So there was difficulty, and because of that, it was known as the way of blood, or the bloody way. And it was given this nickname because the blood which was often shed there, by victims of these criminals, that attacked travelers on this road. And so here we are, right? A man, as Jesus shares, was traveling down this road, okay, alone, I might add, that people are, encouraged not to go down. And so that on all accounts, perhaps he shouldn't have been there, but he is there. And again, there were probably warning signs. People probably said, hey, dude, I think maybe you might not want to go there. And I don't even know. So this is just me thinking what the conversation might be like. They might, don't worry, it's okay. But no, they say you shouldn't, but no. And so, there were probably warning signs, if not physical sign, others probably warned him. Now, if all of this is true, well, then he's sort of kind of like a knucklehead, right? Don't do that. Don't, stove is hot. Don't touch the stove. Touch the stove, right? Don't go down there. Dangerous, and voila. Jumped, beat up, robbed on the side of the road. And a lot of people might say that he may have brought all his troubles down on himself. A lot of people might say that he deserved everything that he got. Perhaps one could say that he made his bed and now all that's left for him to do is to lie in it. We could say that he only has himself to blame. And I know it's Sunday morning, we're in church, sounds kind of cruel, right? And so if we were to be real churchy about it, well, we just say, well then, I think he reaps what he sows, right? It's kind of a Bible term right there. We'll just kind of, but we could say all these kind of things that we tend to say when we don't want to help someone or when we want to judge them. I told you, you saw the signs. We warned you. And I guess the question to ask ourselves this morning is, does God call us to be a neighbor? A neighbor to reach out and love even those we deem undeserving. Even the ones who brought it on themselves by their own poor choices. Does God call us to be a neighbor to them? Let me ask another question. Are we a neighbor to the invisible? And let's revisit verses 31 and 32. It says, a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. So picking up where we left off, the victim, the guy who was robbed and beaten, he was there lying on the side of the road, and there were people who saw him, but nothing. right? Still there on the side of the road. He was overlooked by two, not one, but two, and we'll just say religious guys, right? We're talking about like pastor, minister type guys who saw him and they just kept walking. Now, let me just say that these two individuals, they weren't evil men. They were well-respected leaders, probably known for their teaching, their wisdom, and their compassion. And now with all that said, because I guess my mind functions differently, the first thing that when I read this way back when, wasn't about the Good Samaritan. My first thought was, well, if this was a place where we shouldn't go, right, then why? I wonder why in the world these two religious guys are hanging out, walking down this road. That was just my thought, and that's it's kind of a sketchy place. I don't know. I'm just saying, and I guess it's a topic for a sermon for another day. But that was kind of where my mind went. And anyways, I'm guessing that if those two guys were interviewed as to the why, not why they were there, but why they didn't stop, my guess is they probably could come up with some pretty good stories or examples or excuses, however you want to call that. Maybe they had religious duties and they knew that if they touched the corpse, they would have been excluded from temple duties, which is right. That's deemed unclean, and so you got to go through a period of time where you go through a cleansing. So it'd be a good answer, right? Maybe they didn't think they would know how to help someone in that condition. Okay, it's a response, not as good, but we might buy that. Maybe they knew this could be a trap. And yes, sometimes, criminals, robbers, they would kind of set up a mark where, they would have a injured person, and then they would come and help, and then, it would lure them in and they would attack them. And so, it would be an ambush, and so maybe it was a trap. And so, yeah, this is a valid excuse. But whatever their reasons, the response of these leaders leads to this question, at least for me. Am I a neighbor to the invisible? And I say this because maybe we see the man on the side of the road all too often. And because of that, we become numb. And when we become numb, they become invisible. Now, they might not be the bloody and beaten person on the side of the road, but it could very well be the individual on the side of the road looking for their next meal. Or the individual sitting in front of your local convenience store asking if you could spare some change. We see this all too often. And probably in the last 10 years, we've seen it exponentially more. And because of that, we become numb. And they become invisible. And I guess the question to ask ourselves is, does God call us to be a neighbor, to reach out and love on the invisible in our communities? Another question to ask is, are we a neighbor to the opposition? Verse 33 says, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him." Although racial tensions are still around today, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, I don't think we grasp the complexity of this verse. So as Jesus shares this parable, he addresses this issue of opposition on these multiple perspectives. First, he doesn't come out and say exactly what nationality, what ethnicity the man on the side of the road is. In fact, we really don't know anything about him except that he was injured. But most scholars believe that the injured man was Jewish, and because of that, we kind of draw this conclusion now, right? Because Jews were the enemy, the opposition of Samaritans. The guy who helped him, and they didn't like each other simply based on race. So we have that. The second perspective we see is Jesus turning the tables here. Keep in mind, he's talking to, a Jew, but not just any Jew, a person of influence, an expert in the law. So this guy kind of knows the deal, right? He's educated. And so Jesus turns the tables here because he made the hero of the story here someone other than a Jew. Okay? Now, these experts in the law, they saw things from a perspective. They were the chosen people. They were the ones. They were the heroes in the story. And Jesus turns the tables, and now someone other than the Jewish individual is the hero, but not just anyone, a Samaritan. So we're not just making the other person, but we're making the worst possible case scenario. This is no longer just a story about two people who are supposed to not like each other, but one appears to be elevated above the other. And it's not the one most people would have thought. So just a little background. The Samaritans, they were thought of these half-breed Jews, Jews who intermarried with the Palestinians. And so because they despise the Palestinians, they despise Samaritans just as much. And so the hatred between these two groups was so intense that most Jews, they would refuse to travel through Samaria, and they would kind of take, a longer route, right? Instead, they would cross the Jordan River, go miles out of their way, rather than walk through Samaritan territory. Now, with Jesus being a Jew, I guess the first question to ask is why? Why would Jesus make a Samaritan the hero of this parable? And perhaps because he had a point to make. Perhaps because the real question to ask ourselves here is, does God call us to be a neighbor to those whom are in opposition to us, those who we feel like they're the enemies, those who are different from us? Does God call us to be a neighbor to even them? Another question to ask is, are we a neighbor to the messy? Let's look at verse 34 again. It says, he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. Although Jesus doesn't go into the gruesome details here, he makes it evident that the situation was pretty messy. And that's probably why the other two, the pastor, the religious guys, kind of passed him by. And so despite, how messed up this guy was, I'm guessing there was blood, and so I'm guessing that having seen people beat up before, there was probably much swelling, I think maybe his eyes were swollen shut, this guy, there may be some disfigurement, and if he was left for half dead, maybe there was, exposed flesh. I don't know, the things that come with criminal assault situations. So despite all of that, the Samaritan sees him. And he acts with compassion. Now, I think many of us, we would just kind of automatically put ourselves in the Samaritan's place. But really, would we? You know? Or would we feel like, man, you know what, let me pull out my cell phone here, dial 911, and wait for the paramedics, and then we're good to go. You know, I did my deed, you know, or maybe I could tell someone else, you know. But the Samaritan sees him. He stops. He acts with compassion. And let me just say that, you know, when I talk about messy, I'm not just limiting it to just the gruesomeness, you know, of blood or exposed flesh or any of these things. You know, perhaps there are those in our lives who aren't. Okay? And I'm going to just say this, you know, who aren't as clean as we would like them to be. Or maybe they don't smell as great, or they're not like us. And again, you know, I'm going to just be real here, but I think that for most of us, when we talk about me or us, our story, we are the story. You know, we are the baseline. So anything below me is not acceptable. Anything above me is really good. And so when we say not like me, I'm not saying that, man, I'm all that and then some. I'm just saying that, man, when I look at that, or when we look at those things, do we deem that, man, it's just too messy? Man, they ain't showered for days. Or they're not like me. Or perhaps their problems aren't as neat and tidy as we would like it to be. But, you know, and let me just say this, but that doesn't disqualify them, or disqualify us, rather, from being a neighbor to them. You know, think about it. You know, maybe it's true that some people, some problems are too messy for us to fix. But that doesn't give us the permission to look the other way and walk on by. And so maybe the question to ask ourselves is, does God call us to be a neighbor to those whose lives are messy, messier than ours? Finally, there's one more question I want us to entertain this morning. And it's this: are we a neighbor to the inconvenient? Verses 34 and 35 say this: he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. You know, most of you know that I'm sort of like a list guy, you know, when it comes to working. I like lists. You know, I think for multiple reasons, I think I get satisfaction in checking off the list, you know. But I also realize that I do it because if I don't create lists, there's oftentimes things will fall through the cracks, right? You know, so every day I create a list to be checked off, you know, trying to kind of operate at some type of maximum efficiency. And it's not a bad approach. In fact, it often works for me, but I'll be the first to say that it's not always the best way to approach ministry. You know, think about it. I don't think the Samaritan's calendar, you know, had it on there, you know, kind of penciled in, you know, because I still do just the big calendar, and I got to write it in. You know, when I go to meetings, right, everybody types it in on their phone. You know, I'm like, hold on. I grab out this big calendar, and I start writing down, and they look at me like, that's an old guy right there, you know. But you know, I don't think the Samaritan had it penciled in, you know, help bloody guy on the side of the road. I don't think it was there. Not at all. I think he had to interrupt his schedule. I don't know what his schedule was like, so I'm not saying that, man, his schedule was tight or he was super busy, but or he had to put his checklist on hold. But I am saying that it probably wasn't the most convenient for him to stop, to assess, to render aid, and then not only that, to take him, to get him checked in at an inn and make sure that his needs were taken care of. I don't think that was penciled in. I don't think that was the most convenient thing for him to do. It's often shared these days that the most valuable commodity that we have is time. And the Samaritan didn't think twice about pouring it, his time into a total stranger. And I might add, to help someone who probably would have never helped him. Although I relate to all of these questions that we looked at this morning, it's this one that truly resonates with me. And I guess it's because in the busyness of ministry, there's always a need, to be met. There's always a problem to solve, always something going on. That's kind of a joke at home or even here in the office, because, maybe Joan will ask, hey, what's your schedule like? Oh, it's pretty open right now, Next week is wide open, right? Then she might come 2 days later. Oh, sorry, it's kind of full, And as the days progress, man, it just, there's not enough room in those little boxes in my calendar to write, okay, this going on, And so it is this commodity that we have. And that's why one of the best pieces of advice that I got while I was in seminary from one of my professors was, never fill your day with more than 75% of work. And to be honest, when I first heard it, I was like, man, no wonder ministers, they get this rap that they're lazy. What's the deal, right? I think why does he want me not to work a full day? And then, as it's almost as if he just kind of had these Jedi powers where, I'm saying this in my mind because I'm not saying it out loud. Then he begins to almost respond to the question that's going on in my head, And his explanation was that, and he goes, and some of you might be thinking why, and I'm thinking how did he know what's going on in there? But he went on and said, problems, issues, needs will always come up in ministry. You don't even have to worry about that. You don't even have to pencil that in. It's always going to come up. And if your schedule is so full that you can't add to it, you can't add one more thing to your schedule. It's so full that you can't meet the needs that come up within your church or your community or the people that you're called to serve, then it's a problem. Serving others should never be an inconvenience to us. So he said, so fill your day with 75% of what you think you need to get accomplished, that day and of your time. And then if nothing comes up, then start on the next 75%, And he said it all evens out in the end. And it's something that I've tried to practice throughout these years because, things come up. Needs, and if we're not careful, the needs that God calls us to meet can often seem extremely inconvenient to us. Because people's problems, people's needs, they don't come up and fit into our nice, neat schedules. They just pop up. And when it happens, I guess the question to ask above all of those things is, does God call us to be a neighbor to the inconvenient situation in our lives? Because when they come up, these problems, and they will, we can choose, to stop, to listen, to help, or we can walk on by. Does God call us to be a neighbor to the inconvenient in our lives? When it comes to the people in our neighborhood, we are we like the pastors, the religious type people in this parable? Too busy to get involved, too clean to get messy and dirty, too preoccupied to alter our schedules, too scared or apprehensive to help those who oppose us, too busy or numb to our surroundings to see those around us, or too consumed with ourselves to reach out to the undeserving. See, the parable of the Good Samaritan is one of the most profound messages that Jesus shares in this book. And he did so, in the form of just a simple story. He didn't have this really catchy title. He didn't have 3 awesome points to go by. He didn't have an amazing worship band to back him. He had a story that ended with an invitation, which was, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And when the expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. He commands us to go and do likewise. I want us to be a church that serves its community. And if we want to be that church, then we most certainly need to know and serve the people in our neighborhoods. Let's pray. Our Father, Lord, as we spend time in this parable, this story that Jesus shares, God, and I can only speak for myself that there are times where I read through this and it steps on my toes. And so, Father, I pray that as we look at these things, God, that we would just be able to, Father, to just go and do likewise. Not so much asking the question, who's in my neighborhood? But more so, Lord, who do you desire me, us, to be a neighbor to? And may we hear that. And when we do, God, my prayer is that we would act with kindness and compassion and mercy, like the Samaritan. And we would hear your words to go and do likewise. That's our prayer, Lord. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Come together, walking in the Spirit. There's much to be done. We will come reaching out from above. thank you for worshiping with us today. And we just hope that you go out there and share the love of Jesus Christ with everyone and be that good neighbor that everyone needs. We hope that you have a great week, and we hope to see you again next week. Aloha.